Welcome to the Blockchain Startup Show with Harrison Wright, a podcast dedicated to dauntless blockchain leaders building our new decentralized future. You'll hear stories, successes, trials, and tribulations as we channel into the lives of high-performing leaders in crypto and Web3. Whether you're currently a Web3 founder or leader, or you one day aspire to be, you'll gain crucial knowledge and insights to accelerate your learning curve, handle this industry's greatest challenges, and make the impact you've always dreamed of.
Hello, everyone. This is Harrison Wright. Welcome again to the Blockchain Startup Show. I'm very pleased to have a special guest here today, Tim Dierckxsens. Tim is CEO and co-founder of Venly, a blockchain tooling provider that enables Web2 companies to seamlessly integrate Web3. So I'm very excited to talk about that in particular, as I might be being a little bit optimistic here, but we seem to be maybe just about entering the point now where mass adoption seems like a reality and everyone's not just building more crypto things for crypto people to talk about other crypto people about. So Tim, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Harrison. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. You know, it seems like you've been on the Venly journey a while, and I always do this, but before we get into the meat of things, I'm really curious what got you interested in crypto and what's the Venly story?
Yes. So Venly story, been around since 2017, 18. And before that, we were very much interested in blockchain because once I started out, I was actually a business consultant. And as a consultant, I was always going into businesses, either from a strategic approach to do change management or to try to digitize some of their systems. And whenever I went into those assignments, there was always a point where something like blockchain and smart contracts would be appealing for the case that I was working on in the industry I was at that time assigned towards. So the first time I was in the music industry, where I had to digitize contracts where you have to like streamline the music rights, as in who gets paid what. That was, if you look at it, very logical to add smart contract logic to it. So back then we were in 2014, 15. So Vitalik came up with smart contracts on top of blockchain. So that 100% made sense. Then I went into, what was it? Before that, the postal industry, and then also in cross-border trading, as in bill of ladings and stuff like that. So in every industry I was assigned to, I saw there was a deep connection with blockchain technology. And that got me so much excited, saying, okay, how is it possible that in so many different use cases, you can see a technology be applicable and useful? And I convinced my fellow co-founders now to look into blockchain and smart contracts, and they also agreed that it was something worth investigating. But if you're building on top of blockchain, especially in the good old days of 2016, 17, 18, there was just another problem that you had to solve on the infrastructure layer. So we didn't see it viable for any business to build on blockchain until like what we call the middle layer is tackling those problems, so that once you want to build a use case on top of it, you're not hitting just another brick wall in the process. And fast forward until where we are now, that's what we do.
That makes sense. How much has Venly changed? You know, how much resemblance is the Venly of today better to the Venly of 2018?
I would say it's actually more of the same in terms of positioning and our mission. We do have more of an all-in-one platform. We started out as a wallet provider, but then we added tokenization, we added NFT marketplace, positioned our products around APIs, but grew a little bit too fast in the beginning. So going from one product to a second product to a third product, going from one chain to another chain to another chain. So as an early adopter, we were fast to market, early to market, one of the first, but always we're eating our own dog food and learning at the same time, while the second mover has advantage to see what we are doing wrong. And we then at times have to do like a pivot to then rework everything that we built into something that's, again, sustainable and scalable. So that's actually what we've been doing the last 2 years, is harmonizing all the different features and services that we offer into one platform offering.
It's been really interesting to see that evolution. So I started recruiting in crypto in 2020, give or take. And back then, the industry was definitely split in two. You had what we think of as, Web3 crypto now, how the industry is. But there was also this big segment of enterprise blockchain, private blockchains, whatever you want to call it, that was competing at the time.
It's coming back. Have you
And
seen that?
a little bit, yeah.
So I just noticed
Yeah.
JP Morgan and the Connexus platform. So that's a private version again. And I think Goldman Sachs, they just spin up their GS digital asset platform, which is a separate entity, but it is, again, like a consortium model. So the debate between private and public blockchain is actually picking up again.
It's everything seems to be coming full circle. And the reason I brought this up is, back in 2020, I spoke to, since you mentioned the postal industry, and I noticed one of the use cases for Venly is loyalty programs. Back then, I probably came across about, I'm going to say somewhere between 6 and 12 companies that were working on blockchain for logistics, supply chain provenance and that sort of thing. And I also came across, I used to know quite well the guy who built the first ever blockchain loyalty company, way back when, probably about 2018, maybe a little earlier. And all those things seem really promising, and they kind of died on the vine. I'm not sure any of those companies have survived.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone kind of forgot about those use cases. You must be one of the only survivors from that era. And now it seems to be coming back.
There are a couple, I would say, but yes, we made it through the bear market and the elongated winter quite well, but we still have many more miles to walk.
Yes, but it does get better every year.
It does get better. Well, I wouldn't say that every year gets better and better, but if we look at 2024, it's been way better than 23. Like whatever you were doing in 2023, it just seemed like the perception blockchain will just disappear from a market perspective. But if you look at the reality, that's just the disillusionment that people have that's coming up from one or two waves. And that's typical hype cycle and Gartner hype cycle there. So you have to look beyond that time frame. I think some people have said it well, where you say technology in the short term is largely overestimated, but in the long term underestimated. And the same thing with blockchain. So if we'll fast forward 10 years from now, it's going to be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I mean, even now, again, this might be bull market optimism talking, but say last cycle, if you're just talking about finances, if financial independence is your goal, and you work in crypto, maybe you just hold Bitcoin, right? But if you actually want to generate passive income, the safe way to do that is withdraw to fiat, get a brokerage account, buy dividend stocks, how people normally do it. Probably you could use DeFi, but I think a few years ago it'd be extraordinarily risky. Now I think we're just about at the point where if that's what I wanted to do, I can't see many good arguments for why I wouldn't just use DeFi to do it. I might spread the risk by using multiple DeFi protocols, for staking stablecoin yields, etc. I wouldn't put all my eggs in one protocol. But I don't see why I would want the brokerage account now. I could just use DeFi. But a few years ago, I'd be really hesitant.
Maybe you still want the best of both worlds, right? I wouldn't knock that brokerage account would not make sense. But here, if you really want to be risk averse, you would hedge your bets on have some with your brokerage account, have something on the crypto account, do some DeFi, do some staking, buy some stocks.
Yeah, no, I do see the two. Maybe you have a different perspective, which I'm definitely curious about. For me, the two obvious things that are really blocking more mainstream adoption of crypto right now. One is smart contract security. I mean, the amount of hacks, even with all the money and time that's gone into security recently, do you ever really trust a protocol? And also the user experience, even for people that work. I know people that have worked in crypto for years and have lost all their funds because they did something stupid. definitely not ready for prime time there.
Well, yeah, that's a little bit part of our business, right? So what we tend to do is harmonize smart contract logic, make it um, leveraging best standards, but then providing that through APIs, making sure that everything is audited, that every change that would occur is again audited continuously, having an ethical hacking platform, pushing the boundaries of safety. And at the same time, more and more insurance companies are offering liability insurance. So that's another topic that we also cover. We do have B2B liability insurance on top of our platform. So things like that is moving into the blockchain space where 5 years ago, any type of liability insurance on the protocol level or on SaaS level was unthinkable in our industry.
That's from a risk man. Let's say I'm very risk averse because I've made my money and I don't need to make any more money, but I need to protect it. I'm looking at things like, the FDIC insurance for bank accounts. That's a significant factor versus you see what happened with Celsius and FTX and things like that.
Yep.
But I mean, personally, I've never trusted centralized exchanges. I will not keep any significant funds on there for any period of time. But DeFi backed up with insurance, that's interesting.
Indeed, as long as it can cover, the insurance can cover the risk rate. That's one of the things that is always still a little bit unclear with the rapidness of the protocol and what is really underwritten and how safe it actually is. I think a couple of more steps into that direction, as in how can we simplify, how can we understand these contracts so they time tested. One of the things that we keep facing is, for example, when should we leverage account abstraction, smart contract wallets? Here, you're actually doing the same thing. You're going to say, well, I want to simplify the UI. I want to do some form of abstraction, and I'm going to create a smart contract wallet. But that's a lot of logic that you're putting on the wallet level, where with a normal infrastructure, you have your wallet and you have your smart contract, and they can interact with each other, but it's not tied into one piece. So you're de-risking the security aspect of that. So I think at DEF CON, my CTO was with me. He was also saying all the talks, it's saying, well, we have to do better in terms of security. That's why we're doing cryptography. That's why we're doing blockchain. And you're solving a lot of the infrastructure level. But once you move up in the ladder, for example, at the application level, you still have to adhere to all of the best practices of cybersecurity. So that doesn't matter if it's a decentralized environment or a centralized environment. Security is security.
I don't want to get on too much of a divergence for this because I can easily do that. Go down many rabbit holes that are less and less relevant to the main thrust of the conversation. But one thing I do really appreciate about crypto is the self-responsibility that goes with it. And it's not always there. But if you talk to DeFi teams that are really serious about what they're doing, there's no central governing authority that's telling them, you need to care about security. It's almost like it's their sacred duty to ensure that the security is there. And if you talk to people about hiring smart contract devs, especially in DeFi, if you look at what an engineering role normally is, most engineering positions are, hey, move fast, break things. The faster we can ship code, the better. We'll fix it later. And smart contract developers, it's the exact opposite type of works. The less things you can do, the better. Every change we push has to be audited again, and so on. It's I think of it a bit like being a train driver or a commercial airline pilot. The actual things that you do in the job are a lot less than in many other sort of similar lines of work, but the responsibility that you have is far greater, and the consequences of getting it wrong are much more dramatic.
Exactly.
Which is where the responsibility comes from.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
The thing I like about it is, again, a little bit esoteric, but I think this goes to why people enjoy working in crypto so much is the agency on autonomy. If someone's telling you always what you have to do, you kind of switch your brain off and just do the thing. But if you take it upon yourself to do what needs to be done, I think there's a lot more reward that comes from that. But what I did want to talk to you about was the Bridge acquisition by Stripe. What do you think the implications here are for Web3 and adoption in particular?
Well, if you look at the Bridge acquisition. Bridge actually acquired a wallet provider right before that. And end goal is really to do stablecoin settlement, right? So we're going to see a lot of transactions are going to move on chain, and they're going to use blockchain technology as an infrastructure, and Stripe as a household name in simplifying anything banking related. They're saying, well, we are, I would say, almost the biggest and the baddest tech provider offering simplicity of payments in a digital environment. This is the radical shift where you can see, well, it's not just about payments from banking environment, it's payments from a decentralized environment. So they're actually expanding their scope of operations as a tech provider. And it is $1 billion acquisition, right? So, okay, for Stripe, maybe $1 billion is not much, but it is actually the largest acquisition within our space over the last 4 or 5 years. So it just legitimizes that everybody thought in 2023 blockchain is a fad. It's just going to go away. It's not the technology that makes sense. It's too slow. It's too hard to work with. Here we're seeing the opposite happen. Here we're seeing embracement. And if we're not paying attention in 5 years' time, you're going to see that a lot of things are moving on chain, and it's just happening silently in the back end because infrastructure is becoming mature. And then services like ours, services like Stripe, we're then providing that seamlessness through our architecture to enable a business to use it.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm sure this is before my time recruiting in tech, but I'm sure there was a time where people would describe themselves as, we're a cloud company.
Yeah.
Cloud is just something, you don't even think about cloud. It's just something that exists in the background.
That's actually a funny anecdote. For me, it's funny. One of my first pitches 5 or 6 years ago is blockchain is like the cloud 10 years ago. As in, cloud replaced proprietary technology, on-premise technology, and you moved into the cloud. But in the beginning, you never thought that you would move your server in the basement into something like a cloud environment, right? But if you then look at where we are today, not many companies have their database in the basement or in the file cabinet. They actually have it in a data center on the cloud. So that just gives you some perspective of history of technology shifts over a longer period of time, where cloud was mocked and laughed away, but it is now the household technology that everybody is using. And that shift in terms of payment execution, transaction execution, why you're using infrastructure like blockchain, that is bound to happen in the same depth and time frame like cloud technology. If you just look at the Gartner hype cycle and you really pay attention to the triangles or the squares or the circles, it also always indicates the complexity and the time to maturity. And mostly everything blockchain related is 10 plus years. So when you see it go through the hype cycle, you have some things that says, well, this is going through the hype cycle, but the time to maturity is like 1 year or 2 years. Anything blockchain, smart contract, DeFi related always says like 10 years. So if it's on the peak of the hype cycle and 10 years, you have to like fast forward 10 years and say, okay, it's on the hype now in 2019, expected to mature in 2029.
It's a really good point. And I think I include myself in this. A lot of people working in the industry, especially this last bear market, can get frustrated with, well, where's the real use cases? What are we actually building here? Is any of this actually useful? I think a lot of people in the space, me included, and especially this last bear market, especially last year, can get frustrated with hey, where's the real use cases? Who is actually using this? What are we building? Oh, 100 more layer 2s. How is that helpful? But if you actually take a step back and look at it with that perspective, 2009, that was the year of my first recruitment job. Well, I had another recruitment job a couple of years before that. I got fired after 3 months, but that's another story. My first real recruitment job was in 2009. And back then, we had the server in the office. It was a small company. There were 5 of us there, but there was a server in the office. It ran our CRM, which directly off that server. All the other computers in the office were physically networked up to it. Whoever left the office at the end of the day had to physically take the tape backup drive and take it home. And then there was the ones that stored in the office, but we had the one at home in case there was a fire, and that's just how things worked. I worked in another company, and this was 2013 or so, and they had 3 offices, and they had a VPN that would, the satellite offices, you would connect on a computer, the VPN to the main office, which again ran the server horribly slow, unbearably. I was very glad I worked in the main office. But back in that company in 2009, there were no smartphones then. You didn't even take your work home with you at the end of the day. Whenever we left the office, we would switch the phones to voicemail. We still had desk phones. Wouldn't get any emails at home because nobody had work laptops and we didn't have smartphones. It was only, I don't think I started getting work emails at home until 2013, 2014 or something like that. And if you actually sit and think about it, it's incredible the speed at which technology has completely transformed everything about the way we work in 10 years, less. And in 2009, coincidentally, that's when Bitcoin was created. And so, it probably was about 2019 where people took Bitcoin as a mainstream thing, right? But the actual Web3 applications and stack on top of that is significantly later.
Well, so Ethereum benchmark, I think that was in 2014 plus 10 years. That's this year.
And maybe it's not a coincidence that I was then talking to you about, hey, now this year it feels like I could finally use DeFi to provide passive income the way I would use a traditional sort of brokerage account.
I think all of the puzzle pieces are there, but especially on decentralized side, on the heavy Web3 side of things, it's also like the habit of, I want to do everything myself. There, you're seeing that you're going to have to scramble quite a lot to get all of these ducks in a row. While when we're then targeting the businesses that are a little bit slower to the adoption curve, they have something that is already catering to having like all of those puzzle pieces working for them. So I would say on our side, I don't like the term, but Web 2.5. But from a technology point of view, DeFi is like 2 or 3 years ahead of what we're doing at Venly at this moment. But we're doing that with the sense of most businesses are not ready for that element yet. They're starting to get ready for the first wave of blockchain utilization in a scalable manner that's safe for their business.
Exactly. What there's a trend there as well, which is stablecoins. We're talking about that's a great case in point. Would anyone have imagined 10 years ago that the main use case for crypto right now would be stablecoins? It's the complete opposite of what the people that created the industry would have envisioned. Mm-hmm. But that is arguably, I'm not going to definitively say, but it's arguably the primary use case of crypto right now.
Well, I think
it's because
MakerDAO with DAI, it was one of the first ones that existed, right? They were in the first initial wave of dApps. So I would just say that I think a lot of people, when they're talking or looking at the volatility of things, and you're talking about utility of something, you need a stablecoin element to work, right? For a lot of use cases, whether it's paying employees, cross-border payments, stablecoin just makes sense because how can you then account for it? Like, I'm going to pay Bitcoin to my employees. Some people do that, right? But on the one time, it's then going to be like, how are you going to bring it into the books?
It's a case of usefulness over ideology, and you can see the same thing with Ethereum and Solana. Mm-hmm. From a decentralization perspective, Ethereum is the superior technology, but Solana is the more popular one right now because if you use Solana apps versus Ethereum apps, they're just much easier to use. And the end user does not care about the same thing that the brains behind the industry necessarily care about. And I think that's been a big lesson.
Yep, absolutely. I think you're looking for adoption, you do need to look into the UI. And I think the Solana Foundation, the community have spoken to really bring that network to life, right? I would say I was quite hesitant to support Solana in the early days, especially because there were more and more outages. If you look in the last couple of years, it's really getting to that stability where you would not see that happen as frequently.
Yeah. What if this is really a broad question? It could go in many directions, but user experience must be a key consideration for Venly's business model, since you're targeting people coming from traditional businesses to use Web3. What have you learned about creating a better user experience?
So we focus on the developer experience and then on how they can create a user experience on their UI front, right? So for us, it's looking into the best practices of what you would do for traditional software and then bring everything decentralized into a framework that a traditional developer would understand. Where then if you're a business, say, I finally understood the power of decentralized technology and I want to tap into that. I now have my business analyst, I have my product owner, I have my developer. They can just take the Venly platform, build on top of that because they understand the abstract usefulness of blockchain and they can implement it through the API.
Makes sense. So it's almost enabling the developers, which in turn enables the users.
Yeah, indeed. And then you have to look at what do they need. If you look at the infrastructure layer, right? You have your layer 1s, layer 2, where you want to start from the industry. Well, then you need data APIs or data from the chain, if you want to call it like that. You need your RPC nodes. You need your wall technology. You need your tokenization technology or smart contract technology. Your fiat to crypto on ramps or off ramps, because usually you are going to have an element of coming into the space or going out to the technology. What else? KYC processes. I don't know how to embed all of that into it. And these are just like a whole list of elements that you need just to get something working for your business use case.
Yeah. And is the idea here that you're creating a system so that a developer is not an expert in blockchain can make these things work well?
Indeed, and where they can find the best in class technology through our systems, right? We are not developing everything ourselves. We develop core elements and then we aggregate best in class APIs from other businesses, like for example, a partner and a client of Alchemy or Morales or Simple Hash or a couple of others that you can name. But we're setting one level on top of them and adding additional services. So it's where you can say, well, we're offering more resources and capabilities one level up, which is closer to what you would need from a business point of view.
It almost, this might sound like a strange analogy, but it reminds me of, were you into computers back in the old DOS days?
Yes, but no. I was probably like still playing soccer with my friends in Thailand.
Nice. No, I was, had a misspent youth with computers. I think, I don't know what he was thinking, but my dad literally sat me in front of a computer when I was 2 years old and I could type before I could write.
Oh, lucky you.
It's weird. I can type 140 words a minute. It's not touched. I literally do it with 2 fingers on a thumb. People look at it like, what are you doing? But well, no one ever taught me to touch type. I just taught myself.
Oh, nice.
I think I write some things backwards as well. But I remember, back in the DOS days, interacting with a PC with DOS was very similar in a lot of ways to interacting with, crypto products now. There was no layer of abstraction to make it easy for you. If you wanted to install something, I remember you had the days of install this thing on 27 different floppy disks.
Yeah.
And then it invariably wouldn't work. You had to know exactly. You'd always have some driver problem you needed to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And then Windows came out. And I remember, you see the same thing now, actually. A lot of the purists, me included, hated Windows. Oh, Windows is for idiots. If you're a real computer user, you use DOS. But the reality is, you would never see mass adoption of computers with an interface like DOS. And the initial versions of Windows were not very good. But over time, we moved to graphical interfaces, things being done automatically in the background. Now, sometimes you need to get technical with it, but for the most part, the computer will sort out all these things itself, the drivers and so on.
Yeah.
And I can imagine, even with, say, DeFi, for example, surely we're not long now from a place where, hey, the system will you don't need to know anything about what a smart contract is. It's just going to tell you what that contract does in a simple format.
Absolutely, especially with AI. In the beginning of the conversation, you were also saying you're a big fan of self-management of keys, right? As in, you would also not do anything on a centralized exchange, right? I'm wondering, do you use any password generator or connector to help you remember going into any application like 1Password or LastPass or anything like that?
I should use something like that, but I don't. I have in the past.
And you stopped?
Long story. The reason I used it in the past was before I set up this business, I was doing some freelance stuff and I had clients so they would plug me into their LastPass. So that's the context I used it in.
Mm-hmm. But I would still generally assume for every application, you're making sure that you have a different password set up for anything that you're using, right? Memory, or you write everything down, or you use a system like that to help you log into everything that you have. And that's kind of like the key point that you have to consider where a service provider would still make sense. And if you look at what we're doing, it's not the same type of business, but it's actually quite similar, right? We're providing a service, enabling to create wallets in a simplified manner, helping a user to then have wallet for themselves, and then making sure that it's available. So yeah, I think there's always like a middle ground, as in what you want as an end user, what you want as a developer, what risk exposure that you're ready for. And businesses like ours, they exist because we want to see a mass adoption of infrastructure. You want to see mass adoption of a better business with the use cases that it involves, but don't see it happen without better support.
It's actually a really interesting point. I'm dwelling on it a little bit, but I hadn't considered it from the angle before. That a lot of the adoption piece is actually about enabling developers, not end users. But the more I think about it, the more true that appears. I imagine this will even go further. So say, for example, with websites, back in the day, you had to hire only web developers could build websites. They had to be experts in all sorts of things. Now, when I started this company, I did it on a shoestring budget. So I built my own website. It wasn't the website. It took me like 50 hours to do, and things kept breaking and I had to spend ages figuring it out, but I could build it in WordPress and people said it was a good website. I've got a new website now, but I could do that. I wonder if we'll find a time, say 10 years from now, where a motivated amateur could build their own Web3 application.
Absolutely. If you look at like our integration in Shopify, that's literally an app that you install as a Shopify admin. You have a no-code solution to then create your collection, create a contract, list that product for sale, and enable any buyer to purchase your digital assets, which is on-chain. So from a user perspective, as in a brand or a store owner, you don't even need to understand any coding. So more and more examples like that, integrating into platforms that are no or low code, is just going to continue building using blockchain in the backend.
Yeah. And then another perspective to add to that. So last time I had a search for, I had a DeFi protocol that wanted a sort of, let's call them an OG Solidity dev, the kind of person who'd built something like MakerDAO. When you actually look through it, and this was relatively recent, there aren't that many people who do this. In the entire Western hemisphere of the world, people that have actually been doing this for at least a couple of years, have built something of significance, are still working in a space. We're talking less than 150 people. That is not scalable to need that level of extreme expertise to
Absolutely
be able to build. Not. It's just not.
That's exactly why services like ours would make sense, because we do the translation, right? It's going to the API level where almost any developer can understand it, but everything more complex that is related to blockchain itself, that you either don't need to understand, or you can understand the logic behind it, but you don't need to be able to build it.
Exactly. So let's talk about this from a business point of view, from the perspective of founders. If we see there's a sort of a divergence starting to happen where you can build a Web3 company that is a Web3 native business model aimed at Web3 native people, or you can build a Web3 company for a Web2 audience. How would you say, what makes those approaches different? How do they need to be approached in a different way?
If you're really targeting Web3, you're then also going to leverage all the tools that is very crypto and decentralized in nature, right? So you're going to say, we're never going to do wallet creation from the app point of view. We're always going to integrate using a third-party wallet provider, such as MetaMask or anything that is trusted by the industry mode of people that says this is fully decentralized and this is something that you self-manage. If you're then looking into an application that says, I'm either hybrid, I want you to a Web3 business, but also to a Web2 audience, there you have almost no choice than to say, well, I'm either going to create wallets for my users because I'm doing user identification, user authentication using systems like Okta or something like that, or Google SSO. I need to connect an application wallet for my end user because they're not going to generate that somewhere on their end. So that's where you need to have a facilitating service to bridge that gap. And it's perfectly possible to say, well, depending on my user preference for the application or the business use case, you can say, well, I have a gateway for somebody Web3, so inject MetaMask, or I have a gateway where you can say, look, I will onboard you and I will enable you to leverage blockchain technology in the backend, but I will create the user interface and the experience for you. But everything is API based. So in the end, you are then still creating safe blockchain wallet for the end user, and the business, you're not owning that, right? It's still like from our point of view, if you're creating a wallet using our non-custodial sub-custody route, it's still making sure that the end user gets onboarded, and then they add security systems like 2FA so that they can have like a recovery mechanism that makes sense for them.
Yeah, I can completely see that. What about from a go-to-market perspective as well as strictly the user experience and tech?
Yeah, I think for a long time, we're putting the cart before the horse, as in pushing technology, while for me, technology is more the lubricant, as in there are benefits of blockchain, but they're not going to sell more because you're using blockchain. The values of blockchain is what's most important, right? As in you have a better store of records, you have a better proof of transaction compared to a centralized database. If you would say, I want to build a business where a use case is involving transactions, I have a choice to say, am I going to do this using a centralized system or a decentralized system or infrastructure? Then I'm confident that over time, the benefits of blockchain will outweigh the benefits of doing it fully centralized. And if you're then on building a business application or a use case, in the last 5 years, we're trying to say, well, this is a better business because it's blockchain. Buy into blockchain, buy into crypto, buy into all of this, and you need to be tech savvy to get it. But I don't think that way. I think I want to do cross-border payments. What is the most efficient way to do cross-border payments? It's using blockchain technology. So I want that to work just as seamless as it would like a banking experience, just not with the delay time and the ability where the bank will actually be using funds for other purposes, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm kind of going back to an old point here, but just to briefly mention this divergence between, hey, here's what we have as an ideology and here's what the user actually cares about. I think Bitcoin is actually a classic case of this, because the people that, the Bitcoin true believers care about decentralization, sound money, all these things. But those are not the things that make Bitcoin adoption happen. The thing that makes Bitcoin adoption happen is number go up. It's almost like the prospect of people getting rich from Bitcoin is like a Trojan horse that drives Bitcoin adoption. The reason that it gets adopted is not the purpose that it actually serves.
I would argue that people don't care about Bitcoin because it's decentralized. If you look at Bitcoin, I would care about it because, one, it's deflationary. There's only 21 million Bitcoin, there's never going to be more. While if you don't put that against the federal government and just IMF or anything printing money on the fly whenever the economic rationality for them makes sense. The care about decentralization, it's just making sense that from a rational point of view, this is more safe than having a government that can print money on the fly. So what is actually the thing that we value? I think 4 or 5 years ago, Bitcoin was called a store of value, right? As in, it was a better store of value than money. It was a better store of value than gold. I don't see those terms being highlighted as much as it was in the past, but it still makes sense.
Yeah, I guess what I'm driving at is, so the true believers in Bitcoin, which I would count myself one, we care about the sound money principles, the deflationary aspect from a philosophical standpoint.
So,
But the vast majority of people who own Bitcoin don't philosophically care about any of that at all. They just know, hey, if I keep fiat, I'll get poorer. If I buy Bitcoin, I'll get richer. And that's the thing that drives the adoption.
Yeah.
I think it's a good principle to keep in mind for any business.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is still a risk that if there's no more belief that Bitcoin is a good store of value, that it will eventually go to zero, right? I'm not one of those people that would believe that, because you're seeing digitalization making more and more sense over time. Technology is undefeated for a large extent. Bitcoin has just shown over the past decade that it is robust and stable like that.
And the more inertia it gets, the harder it is to dislodge.
Yeah, indeed. But everybody,
Although that was my theory for Ethereum as well, and then Solana came out of nowhere.
but would you consider Ethereum dislodged, or would you consider that it's fighting for market share, but it's still very much an ecosystem that's vibrant?
Maybe dislodged is overstating it, but I thought, whenever you see something that's reliant on network effects, there's usually one winner. There's no Facebook competitor. Facebook got made obsolete by something else, or Twitter serves a completely different niche than does LinkedIn, and so on. There's no two-horse race between these kinds of global network effects based platforms. Generally, I thought the same thing would happen here.
Well,
a lot of layer ones would try, but Ethereum would have most of the market.
well, yes and no, right? Like, then you're saying you have Tencent Cloud, you have AWS Cloud, you have Azure, you have probably like 10 or 15 others. And there are probably more competitors, but maybe we're just losing sight of them. Like there's no Facebook alternative. You have TikTok, you have Twitter. You're saying it's a different niche. You have LinkedIn. It's a different type of social media platform, but there are still quite a few numbers of the very large. And if you're going to look into all the others of smaller social media platforms, there's just a lot that exists out there.
Yeah, just, off our normal radar.
Just offer a normal radar, indeed. Maybe not talk this much, but maybe leverage quite a lot. Reddit. There you go. There's another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Staying on the go-to-market and what's useful to founders theme, a lot of people will say, and I was resistant to this idea for quite a while, but I eventually came around to this way of thinking. A lot of people would say, everything about go-to-market, BD, sales marketing in crypto is flatly different from other industries. The things that will work in a traditional industry context don't work in crypto, and maybe vice versa. Do you see that there's a fundamental difference that needs to take place in terms of how go-to-market is approached for Web 2 and Web 3, not necessarily from a sort of technical or strategy perspective, but from a vibe? I can't think of a better word than vibes, but the community aspect, the way things are presented, the sort of the personality of the brand.
It's hard, but I would want to be able to go back in time and understand how the vibe was back in 97, 98, right before the dot-com bubble. And my assumption, and I would have to talk to somebody 15, 20 years older than I am, that it's pretty similar to back then. As in, you had this new industry, you had this new technology. If you look at the articles, not the articles, but I think it's either Letterman or Bill Gates on Letterman, I believe, where he's trying to explain what the internet is, like the radio, and Letterman not getting it at all, right, at the time. And you have to be part of the community. You have to be a technologist. You have to be really following that wave. And my rationality is this is the same point in time as it was back then, but just a different technology piece. And once you go into the maturity, and you're going into real world adoption, as in beyond the community phase, everything that's important now in a Web 2 environment is going to still be important in a Web 3 environment. Go to market, you have to measure everything. You have to understand your ICP. You have to understand how you can grow. You have to be able to say, last month, my metrics was at X or Y percent, and I'm moving forward. That has to grow into Z percent or stuff like that. A lot of these capabilities are seemingly not important or available in a Web3 market, but that's just because we are not there in terms of maturity and having all the tools at our disposal to do that.
That's a really interesting comparison. Do you think the likely future here is that as crypto becomes more mainstream, crypto culture itself will become watered down and less distinct than it is now into sort of the wider society and business world?
Well, for me, yes, because I'm talking about blockchain 99% of the time. Let's talk about crypto.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm going to have to think about that some more. I can see that happening. Looking forward in other ways, I'm kind of rolling three topics under one here, but broadly speaking, other things for founders to consider and the industry to consider for adoption. Regulatory challenges, and interesting how that might change now, especially in the US, tokenization, cross-chain development. I'm going to leave that floating in the air sort of broadly for you to pick up. No specific question for you, but what do you think would be really pertinent to discuss there?
You have to embrace regulation, right? And regulation is there to keep us safe. It doesn't matter if it's for centralized or decentralized. It is, in most cases, a good thing. The point to consider is regulation curbing innovation or enabling innovation? So we're rapidly all becoming technologists, right? Even though if you're not coding, everybody's using something digital. Everybody has a digital twin, as it may, right? You have a persona on social media or something like that, and you still need a form to protect that. And when you're looking at regulation, we just need to make sure that regulation supports technology and does not kill it. And I think if you look at Trump being president, I'm not going to say I'm for or against it. One thing, it does support blockchain and crypto adoption because he has a more innovative stance in moving forward with it.
From a pragmatic standpoint, what do you think founders should be taking? Let me ask it in a slightly different way. So there was and I think this mentality still exists, but for a long time in particular, the way a lot of founders approach regulation was, hey, those guys are the enemy. I'm going to build this in a way that it can't be regulated. Screw you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that particular approach is becoming less viable as time goes on?
To be frank, I never understood it because if you look at the basics of blockchain is to provide more transparency, to provide more trust, to make sure that you might say that you might not need regulation because everything is tracked until the end of time to the ledger, right? But that's then bring technology and regulation into a bigger picture, because I understand that if you're using Bitcoin to buy drugs and drugs are illegal, that's a problem that you still need to solve. And that's making sure that you're using technology in the right format so that you're complying with regulation. What I like a lot is, if you're looking at Midnight, I'm not sure if you know about Midnight. That's one that I keep following as an spin-off from Cardano, but they're focusing on data privacy, but also adhering to compliance. So how can you make sure that everything that you're doing in terms of data sharing and stuff like that, or transaction data that you're providing, it's fully private, but where you can please the regulators and say, well, we can be fully compliant, even though that we're respecting privacy. So that's a very big topic and use case where I would say a lot of ZK is focusing on that, but we're getting the compliance piece on top of it.
Yeah, I've noticed adjacent trend, and I can't speak too much about compliance itself. It's not something I personally have had much cause to have experience with, but I've noticed this interesting trend where, say in the last cycle, go back 3 or 4 years, it was very common to see crypto companies that were completely disorganized. Left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. They grow to 50 headcount. They don't have anyone in operations. They don't have anyone who understands anything cross-functional. Technical founders, they don't understand the business side.
I don't think
Chaos.
I don't think that's about crypto or blockchain or traditional. That's typical VC backing, and you have to grow out the market share as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of funding that went into blockchain back in 2020, 21, 22, right? There was this running joke where he said, with the NFT hype, all you have to do is go on the streets of Silicon Valley, shout NFT, 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 and you have 20 term sheets thrown at you. There was a certain moment in time that happened. And yeah, then you're given so much cash and you're pushed to grow as quickly as possible, but you're not mature enough as a founder, as a business, to grow into that scale as quickly and as rapidly as where you'd be in an industry where you would have VC backing, but the amount of deals that would go into that, there's a lot more due diligence being done to make sure that the companies that they bet on in a traditional setting have more chances to survive. So that's the double-edged sword. I don't think it's blockchain related versus traditional related. There was just too much money going in, and a lot of companies like ours got funded. And we were one of the lucky ones to get funded at the time. And we had the same problem. We grew very fast. The market cut off, and we need to reinvent ourselves. It's, lucky for us, we were in a position where we had to make hard choices to survive and adapt to the market itself.
That it brings to mind is, I'd not considered the point that might just be a VC startup thing and not a crypto thing, because this crypto, I've recruited in about 5 or 6 different industries now, but crypto is the first one that is VC backed. So I didn't work in VC funded industries before. But what I've noticed is this cycle, especially this year, it's a lot more common for small teams to have someone running operations and being the glue that ties everything together, which sometimes includes compliance. And I've also noticed, I don't have any hard data on this, just pattern recognition from observation. The teams that have the sort of operations, organization, that side of things sorted out in an early stage tend to do much better in every way. They retain people better. They hit the market better. They're not making 50 layoffs every time the market turns. But now you bring up the point about the VC funding. I wonder if that is a function of the market being more mature or just bear market survival.
Well, now it's bear market survival, right? But back in 2021, if you would go into the charts of how much funding that went into anything blockchain crypto related, it was rampant. So if you're looking at it now, I think it's more following a traditional approach where the amount of deals is not surpassing most other industries in the software space. So companies that are getting funded now, they're probably more mature than companies back in 2019, 2020.
I saw some ridiculous things in terms of which companies were getting funded in 2021 in particular.
Exactly. We were actually funded in 2021, so I hope you don't count us as one of those ridiculous things. You never know.
No, you're still here.
Yeah, we're still here indeed for years to come.
Absolutely. I guess that brings me to probably my last question is, I guess it's 6 years. Not many people can claim to have been running a blockchain company successfully for 6 years. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
Apart from the funding, I would do almost everything differently in hindsight. That's because you're forever learning and you don't know what you don't know. And if you have the ability to take everything that you've learned now and apply back to what you've done 6 years ago, yeah, you'd be in a very different position. So do I regret anything? Absolutely not, because it's a journey of continuous learning and improving and making sure that in the end, the goal and the mission is to create adoption for the technology, right? Because we believe so much that the technology has so much merit for businesses and that we're a gateway drug to enable that. But for us as a business to be able to thrive in any market condition. And I would say there are so many things that we could have done better in the last 6 years. And in the next 6 years or 10 years to come, there are other things that we would have thought if we had known this by then, it'll be even different. But yeah, just building a business is not easy.
I saw a stat, and this was I haven't looked at the latest stat, but this was in 2022 after the market crash. And the stat was in 2022, the percentage. Do you want to guess what the percentage of seed stage crypto companies that successfully received Series A funding was in 2022?
No, go ahead.
0.27%.
Got funding. 0.27% got seed stage funding.
Series A.
Series
after they'd already raised a seed.
All right. So you're part of that percentage. That's good.
Running any business is challenging. I think running a funded business must be especially challenging. I know I'm self-aware enough to know I don't think it would be for me. I have a lot of respect for people that can do it. It's a exceptionally low success rate.
Once you go into Series B and Series C, I think the rate drops even further.
Yeah.
But we like a challenge.
I guess the philosophical thing I'll tie up with that, looking at our whole theme of adoption and market cycles and so on, is actually, I don't know if you've noticed this, but on Twitter, it's become popular to slate VCs lately in the past year or so. And everyone loves talking about meme coins. Oh, yes. The meme coins are where the real people want to buy meme coins. Talking about retail here. But actually, if you look at the function of VCs and funded founders, imagine the amount of money and resources that's going into creating all these millions of experiments that need to happen in order to create all this scaffolding that we can build a real industry on. If you didn't have VCs, it would not be feasible to build all this infrastructure. And yeah, only, 1% or whatever is going to still be there in the end. But you needed to have those 99 other failed experiments in order to create that 1%. So I think everyone involved in doing that is doing a tremendous service to everyone and should be celebrated perhaps more than it is.
Absolutely.
Well, Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Any final words of advice for founders you would have?
Think twice. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to be a founder, you really want to build a business, there's a difference between really going for it and being able to see the end of the tunnel, especially talking to founder CEOs. One of the hardest things that I have to do is always be able to be the last man standing and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And this can be sometimes days, weeks, months, or even years on end, where you're always that rational optimist and everybody is saying it's not possible. And that's from most big turning points that actually happens. So as a founder, you really need to be one that is rationally optimistic, where you can convince your fellow co-founders, your fellow employees that the end is in sight, right? As in the end, as in the light at the end of the tunnel is in sight. And there, I would say, probably 10 different moments where you could say, if we take a wrong turn, we would be out of business by now. And that is one of the hardest things while you're being a founder.
At the same time, if you can't believe in your company, why should anyone else?
Exactly. So you have to be the rational optimist in that case, right? So is it then where you're that naive that you're the only one believing it at that point? Or are you seeing something that somebody else cannot see at that moment in time? And it's really the balance, right? So because sometimes you're thinking, like, how's it possible that in 2023, the entire market is gone? Do we have to stop and move away from blockchain altogether? No, of course not. The market doesn't disappear overnight like that, but it does feel like it. So there you then have to strategically look into where are we now? Which changes do we have to make? We didn't do that overnight. So we didn't instantly say, okay, let's just put everything into neutral because a business, especially the larger you get, is like an oil tanker. You cannot just cruise like a sail ship.
And I think one of the key takeaways from this is no matter how much you think you're prepared, you're never going to know enough. You just have to do it and learn as you go.
Yeah. And then I would say the more that you're like a serial entrepreneur and redoing the startup phase, right? And saying I can do from 0 to 1, or I can do from 1 to 2. Like I would say I'm quite confident from 0 to 1, I can do that over and over again. But for a long time, we're doing from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 10. But that's a very different discipline and skill. So we're learning that on how are we building a bigger business? How are we building a sustainable business? And it's a very different skill set. And you have to acknowledge that either you're going to do it yourself or you're going to have to hire people that are going to do it with and for you, that become to a larger extent the team that will make that ship forward.
Also, we keep diverging, but I just thought that was a really interesting point. It's like, Zuckerberg, for example. Zuckerberg is actually extremely rare. It's not normally the case that the founder is the right person to run the company when it gets to that size. Usually the founder takes it to a certain point, and then it's probably wise to hire a CEO to take it to the next point, because it's a completely different skill set to run a big company than to grow a small one.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah.
A lot of crypto companies never get a big enough headcount to get to that point, but I'm sure we will get there in coming years.
We have a number now, right? So as you mature, the numbers will go up.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you here, and it's been really insightful.
Thank you, Harrison. I appreciate the time that you've given me on your podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. To everyone listening, thank you. This has been the Blockchain Startup Show, and we'll see you soon.